The soft light of dawn, golden and gentle, crept quietly into the Victorian parlor, slipping past thick velvet drapes and fanning across the polished wood of the floor. As shadows retreated, the ornate details of the room emerged. Floral wallpaper faded by decades of laughter and whispers, ivory figurines poised gracefully atop the mantel, the deep curve of a settee cushioned with shining brocade. The air held a hush, touched lightly by the aroma of last night's candle wax and lavender oil. Within the tranquil stillness, an ordinary guest, a woman of unremarkable appearance, her features softened by the first light, gently stirred beneath an embroidered shawl. Her hair, tucked neatly at the nape of her neck, glimmered faintly in the morning glow, and she listened to the distant echo of carriage wheels upon cobblestones below. Beside her, a small porcelain cup rested on a delicate table. The rim, dusty and fine, awaited the day's first sip of tea. Across the room, the grand clock, its brass pendulum motionless, seemed to hold its breath as if reluctant to shatter the peace with the coming of another hour. Though the house was quiet, memories of last evening's seance drifted through the gentle morning silence. The guest recalled the hush that had fallen just before dusk, when heavy curtains were drawn tight and soft candlelight bathed the room in amber shadows. The assembled guests had sat hand in hand, their voices barely above a whisper as the medium, a woman shrouded in silk, her eyes closed in deep concentration, began to summon secrets from the unseen. The guest remembered a faint chill, like a current of cool air winding around ankles and up through polished chair legs, followed by the delicate trembling of the table beneath their fingertips. Despite the uncertainty and subtle anxieties that had passed through her, the memory brought not fear, but a curious comfort. Now, with the rising sun warming the window panes and the echoes of superstition fading gently in the light, the atmosphere was transformed. The soft murmur of a songbird outside replaced last night's murmurs of longing, and as the guest drew in a slow, steady breath, she felt, in heart and home alike, a gentle peace settling over the world anew. The air carried subtle scents of earth and lingering dew, seeping in through the slightest cracks around the old sash windows. With each easy breath, the guest felt those traces swirl around her, stirring gentle memories of distant fields and misty hedgerows, even as she sat deep within the city's heart. The aroma coiled together with a faint suggestion of cooled ash, a reminder of the spent coals in the marble hearth, now cold beneath its iron grate. As she rose from the settee, the embroidered shawl slipping gracefully from her shoulders, the soft pads of her feet pressed into the lush carpet, brushing threads that held their own stories of years past. She padded to the window and drew back just a corner of the heavy velvet, careful not to wake the others in the house. The golden light spilled more freely now, painting new warmth over the time-worn patterns of the parlor. Beyond the glass, the garden, damp and shimmering, waited quietly, a haze of green and brown touched by the promise of a new day. Deep within the house, the soulful echoes of last night's seance lingered, yet in the early hours the guest found herself comforted by the grounding scents and soft textures of the morning. The parlor seemed less enigmatic now, the weight of spiritual questions surrendered to the soothing rhythm of daily life beginning anew. A log crackled faintly in the hearth as a servant, solemn and quiet, carried a metal scuttle to clear away the remnants of ash, careful not to disturb the meditative mood. The guest watched this everyday task with a calm appreciation, the gentle clink of metal, the muffled brush on stone, the servant's steady hands. Even the tallest candlesticks, once flickering with uncertain flame, now stood extinguished, their wax trails marking plain evidence of a night gone by. The ordinary acts of cleaning and preparation, of drawing fresh air indoors and sweeping the last secrets of the fire into forgetfulness, became rituals of their own kind, reminders that life's mysteries could be held gently and then eased away as light swept gently through parlor and soul alike. A gentle morning breeze wove its way through the garden and brushed against the sturdy walls of the parlor, making its presence known in the softest of ways. The heavy velvet curtains, once so carefully closed for secrecy and spirit calling, now swayed with subtle motion, their fringes trembling in the golden glow. Outside, slender branches of the garden's lime, and elder trees shivered in unison, the earliest leaves quivering like tiny green bells carried by the breeze. Each movement sent a soothing pattern of shifting dappled light across the floor, chasing away the last remnants of nighttime somberness. As the guest returned to her seat, she paused briefly near the open window, her fingers resting on the sill, feeling the cool, moist air that teased the curtains with its fresh promise. She watched as dust motes danced in the sunbeams, moving lazily in the swirls created by the draft, each a glimmering reminder of the world's ongoing, gentle change. The quiet song of the wind, blending with the faint chirping of distant birds and the hush of city activity beginning beyond the garden wall, filled the parlor with the subtle pulse of morning life. Even the somber grandfather clock seemed willing to listen, its tick softened, as if out of respect for the day's early tranquility. The guest found herself soothed by the interplay of movement and stillness, the curtain's rhythm, the swaying green beyond the glass, and the steadiness of her breath. Within this delicate music, yesterday's secrets and questions waned, replaced by the comfort of a well-loved home, yielding gently to the ways of nature. For a moment the world held nothing but this sweeping peace, fabric and leaf stirred by wind and sunlight, shadows and scents braided together, the old house quiet yet awake, and a sense that whatever mysteries had passed during the night would be quietly carried away on the morning breeze. In the early quiet of the parlor, sounds were few and soothing in their softness. The faintest chirr of a sparrow drifted from the garden, its notes brightening the hush that filled the old house. Aside from this, little broke the silence but the occasional sigh of the wind against the glass, or the even lighter touch of a leaf brushing the pane. The guest listened with calm, letting her thoughts settle with each patient breath. Somewhere deeper in the house, footsteps moved with a measured rhythm, muffled by thick rugs and old wood, perhaps a servant preparing the kitchen, or simply crossing the main hall. These gentle sounds did nothing to disturb the peace. Instead, they wrapped the guest further in the deep comfort of morning stillness, a slow transition from the mysteries of the night towards the simple patterns of a new day. As the guest sat, hands folded neatly in her lap, she became aware of the delicate interplay between sound and silence. The measured footfalls seemed to synchronize with the gentle sway of the curtains, each movement settled in its place, unrushed and untroubled. Another bird called from the tangled branches outside, a brief trilling note, before peace reclaimed the air. The comforting routine, the muted steps, the distant call, the whisper of breeze through curtained windows, offered a sense of wholeness. In this gentle music of life, there was no hurry or demand, only the slow unfolding of dawn's promises. The guest allowed herself to be fully within this quiet, knowing that in these sparse, honest sounds, the soul of the house, its calm, its history, its steady heartbeat, was heard most clearly. In the gentle hush of the parlor, upstairs in a chamber lit only by the vague shimmer of dawn, someone quietly stirred from sleep. The rustle of bed linens was almost inaudible, delicate and slow, as the household's rhythms began to awaken. A slender hand reached for the heavy coverlet, sliding it aside with practiced care so as not to disturb the peaceful air. The sleeper, perhaps another guest or a devoted family member, opened their eyes to the muted glow creeping across the wall, not rushing the tradition of waking. Their breathing was steady, measured. The soft thud of a heartbeat echoed the deliberate stillness all around. An arm stretched, and a gentle sigh lifted into the calm, joining the barely there chorus of steps and songbirds filtering up from below. In these moments, the world felt weightless, as if the cares waiting beyond the threshold would delay just a little longer. Rising without a spoken word, the figure drew a shawl around their sleeping gown and walked with silent purpose toward the window. Outside, the light had begun to flower among the tree branches and hedges, tracing gentle shapes on the glass pane. There was no need for voices yet, no lively conversation, only the quiet footfalls upon the well-worn floorboards and the soft hush of fabric against skin. A glance into the garden revealed the dew still clinging to grass and leaves, the silhouettes of sparrows and finches busy with their early routines. The peace of this awakening, both ordinary and profound, suffused the house with warmth and comfort. Downstairs, life waited to begin its familiar path, yet for one lovely moment, in the calm embrace of silence and new light, everyone and everything shared in the pure tranquility that comes only with the very first waking hour. From the edge of the bed, the guest let her bare feet rest on the well-worn, paisley-patterned rug, savoring the gentle coolness that greeted her toes. She moved unhurriedly, shoulders wrapped in her shawl, fingers smoothing soft folds of fabric as if to settle both the cloth and her own quiet energy. Her dark, modest gown, a simple flourish of buttons at the sleeve, a neat lace collar at the throat, rustled faintly as she shifted her weight, gathering herself for the day's slow beginning. Guided by a comforting routine, she tucked a stray strand of hair behind one ear and pressed her palm to the wooden windowsill, letting the dawn's filtered light wrap its golden warmth around her outstretched hand. These little gestures, neither grand nor hurried, gave shape to the morning as surely as the soft sunrise traced its way across the wall and floor. In this moment, the world spun on the axis of her small, mindful movements, each one a quiet declaration: I am here, awake, ready for the day to unfold. Her eyes, gentle and curious, wandered the space, tracing the edges of the furniture, the intricate details carved into the foot of the bed, the comforting clutter of books and a porcelain dish resting atop a dainty side table. She glanced toward the looking-glass resting atop a dresser, where her own reflection shimmered vaguely in the pale morning glow. With thoughtful care, she smoothed her hair at the nape of her neck and readjusted the shawl, its embroidered edge catching a glimmer of light. Before leaving the room, she paused, standing in the quiet threshold. Her breath came slow and steady, chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm. Each simple action, the caress of the rug under her feet, the adjusting of her gown and shawl, the gentle gathering of her thoughts, set a tranquil tone, hinting at a character whose presence was marked not by drama or proclamation, but by the careful, loving touch she brought to even the plainest gestures. From the window of her softly lit chamber, the guest could gaze out over a patchwork of slate rooftops and bustling narrow lanes that made up the heart of the city. Chimneys stood like watchful sentinels, each with a faint trail of smoke dissolving into cool, pale air. Beyond the close warren of brick and stone, the distant toll of a church bell marked the new hour, echoing gently through twisting alleys. Tiny gardens, carefully enclosed behind wrought iron fences, bloomed with early herbs and roses, a splash of green and color set against the neat geometry of urban living. Horse-drawn carriages clicked along the cobblestone street below, their steady rhythm harmonizing with the crow of a faraway vendor announcing morning wares. Even in this urban world, each home seemed a private sanctuary, a place where the inside could become a world apart from the steady heartbeat of the city outside. She opened the window a little wider, greeting a faint tangle of city scents. Bread just baked in a nearby shop, the muddy undercurrent of the river a few blocks away, and the sweet hint of violets clinging to damp stone. In this Victorian urban landscape, the guest's life unfolded within rooms filled with embroidered cushions, heavy drapes, and memories passed down in the hush of morning rituals. Yet, only an arm's reach away, the city called with its mix of urgency and possibility. A throng of footfalls, carriage wheels, stray dogs, and children dashing between markets. The contrast between her calm, ordered morning and the waking tumult below shaped every moment, giving her a sense of place like no other. It was a city alive with stories, dreams, and customs, its old houses standing shoulder to shoulder, their windows offering warm glimpses into private worlds, quietly bracing themselves for another day on the busy urban stage. The city outside the window felt alive with texture and quiet detail. Each slate rooftop glistened with a gentle sheen of dew, their angled surfaces forming a ragged tapestry stretching into the distance. Tiny chimneys, dark with age, stood at crooked intervals, sending up occasional threads of smoke that drifted and curled in the uncertain breeze. Narrow lanes wove between houses like ribbons pulled tightly across the city's patchwork, their cobblestones uneven from years of passing boots and carriage wheels. Here and there, the sharp clatter of iron rims or the soft patter of young feet brought the street to life, accompanied by shopkeepers arranging baskets of fruit against their wooden stalls, and vendors calling quiet greetings into the fresh morning. The cool air shimmered with the scent of bread and river mud, and even without a single word spoken, the entire landscape hummed with the early promise of another busy day. Within her chamber, the scene was equally rich and textured. The guest's feet pressed gently into the paisley rug, its fibers faintly prickly but welcoming beneath her toes. Heavy velvet drapes framed the open window, their crimson folds casting a pool of softness on the floor, and dimming the sun's light just enough to let dust motes dance in lazy whirls. The wallpaper, pale with age and patterned in faintly faded roses, carried the weight of countless dawns before this one. Furniture, sturdy and purposefully placed, bore the marks of use, a teacup's faint ring on a polished side table, the dip in a favorite chair's seat cushion, the gentle wear at the edge of the windowsill where so many hands had rested. Even the air inside moved softly, carrying a blend of lavender and old books, coal ash and spring earth. Together, these quiet, accumulated textures brought the world of the house and the city into gentle harmony, every detail woven together like the threads in the dawn-lit rug beneath her feet. As the guest brushed a gentle hand across her sleeve and gazed out into the awakening city, her thoughts settled on the simple tasks waiting for her that day. She would join her host for a leisurely breakfast, the soft clinking of china and low murmurs of morning conversation promising a familiar comfort. There were newly arrived letters to be read, their script perhaps bearing the news of distant relatives or quietly unfolding business plans. Later, she would help with flower arrangements for the parlor, a task she cherished, setting lush sprays of lilac and roses into vases, bringing the scent and color of the garden indoors. In the afternoon, a carriage was to arrive, bearing an old friend who'd traveled from the countryside for a brief visit. The guest anticipated the warmth of old stories and laughter shared beside the fire, the company of friendly faces mingling with memories as gentle as the light diffusing through the lace curtains. The day, though simple, felt rich with purpose and connection, a tapestry of routines and small joys. There was no great hurry, only the quiet pulse of daily life, the folding of fresh linens for the guest chamber, the choosing of a book to lend a moment of solace or delight between chores, the careful blending of herbal teas in preparation for the afternoon's gathering. Even the preparation itself brought pleasure, in the way her hands smoothed the tablecloth or arranged a handful of wild violets beside the breakfast tray. Every motion felt meaningful, grounding her in the space and time of this old house, and in the kindly expectations of those around her. She moved from window to dresser, already picturing the gentle moments to come, the clasp of a friend's hand at the door, the comfort of a quiet hour with needlework, and the satisfaction of seeing the parlor brightened by fresh blooms. In these quiet preparations, she found a sense of belonging, held steady by the small, loving routines that marked life in the heart of the city. The first order of the day was a cherished little ritual, arranging the parlor's morning flowers. With gentle hands, the guest selected stems from a basket brought in from the tiny city garden first thing at dawn, clusters of lilac, sprigs of rosemary, and a few dew-laden roses that filled the air with a sweet, earthy perfume. She trimmed the ends with a small silver pair of shears, her motion steady and sure. One by one, she placed each bloom into a pattern that pleased her eye, working silently as the sunbeams crept farther across the polished surface of the table. This simple act, delicate and beautiful, brought a quiet order to the room and a sense of peaceful readiness to her heart. The vases, standing in their freshly filled glory, transformed the parlor, a vibrant invitation to all who would pass through its doors that day. Later, anticipation settled as she prepared for the arrival of her guest, an old friend from the countryside who was to travel by carriage to the city. There was a gentle energy in the air. Linens were aired and pressed, the finest china placed on the serving tray, and a special pot of herbal tea set to steep just before afternoon. Every preparation, the fluffing of cushions, the folding of a warm shawl, the placement of a favorite book near an armchair, carried with it the careful expectation of reunion. She imagined the laughter that would ripple through the room, and the warm glow of conversation, rekindling old memories. The day was shaped by its rituals, each gesture both a welcome and a promise, that every friend would be greeted with comfort, every gathering graced by care, and every routine made meaningful by attention and kindness. In her heart, the guest understood that these small ceremonies wove the fabric of life, binding the joys of yesterday with the gentle hopes of today. As the guest moved quietly through the parlor with her armful of fresh flowers, there was a hush that held something more than simple calm. Each vase she arranged felt heavier than usual, as if the weight of memory or expectation had settled upon the petals. Her friend's visit, so long anticipated, was a comfort, but it carried echoes of things unspoken, old misunderstandings perhaps, or the silent ache of changed seasons and lives lived apart. She pressed a palm gently into the polished table, steadying herself, aware of a knot of nerves beneath the surface of her smooth, practiced habits. There were worries that existed just out of sight, woven into the simple routines. Would laughter come as easily as before? Would the old warmth remain? Or would it flicker shyly in the space between new words and old pain? Though soothing in their repetition, the day's rituals seemed, for a moment, like gentle shields, warding off the quiet uncertainties drifting through the golden morning light. In the distance, the rattle of carriage wheels on damp cobbles signaled that noon approached, drawing hopes and anxieties nearer with every turn. She glanced at the clock, the steady movement of its hands like a soft but persistent reminder that time was always passing, carrying with it both promise and apprehension. The guest checked the place setting one last time, smoothing a napkin and straightening a spoon, careful to silence the restless flutter inside her chest. She carried within her the hidden tension of wanting everything to be perfect, a wish to mend what time and distance may have softened or frayed, but never truly erased. Outside, the city thrummed with its own energies, unaware. Inside, she allowed her breath to steady, holding close the purpose of welcome and the small but certain burden of hope. With each careful step, she tried to let the gentle rituals hold and soothe both her anticipation and her longing for connection, trusting that kindness might bridge what history alone could not. To quiet the flutter of nerves in her chest, the guest turned toward the hearth and reached for the small brass kettle set aside on the marble mantel. She filled it carefully at the wash basin, listening to the gentle rush of water as it filled the vessel. The sound, steady and familiar, helped anchor her. She set the kettle over the glowing coals in the grate, watching as curls of faint steam began to rise in the soft glow of the morning. The act of preparing tea was simple. Measured scoops of leaves into a delicate pot, the slow pour of steaming water, the gentle swirl of heat and scent. She let each motion absorb her attention, the measured clink of porcelain, the soft brush of her linen sleeve as she moved, the soothing swirl of amber liquid. This small ritual, nothing urgent, nothing flamboyant, offered reassurance. It breathed the sense of order and calm into the restless air. As the tea steeped, she took a quiet seat by the window, folding her hands in her lap and letting her gaze rest on the shifting city below. She focused on the rhythm of her own breathing, finding a gentle comfort in the rise and fall of each breath. The sunlight moved slowly over her face, warming her skin and catching the delicate lines of her profile. In this grounded moment, the unspoken worries faded. The ordinary beauty of the task, a brief, fragrant stillness, became her shield. With each sip, she allowed herself to let go of fears about the coming visit, the pressure of memories or expectations. She watched as a single sparrow hopped along the sill, feathers ruffling in the breeze, its gentle persistence, a quiet lesson in simplicity. With every careful gesture, every breath taken in the lingering scent of tea and city air, she built a gentle foundation for the day ahead, held steady by her own quiet presence. She reached for her ivory-handled hairbrush, a cherished keepsake resting on the polished surface of her dressing table. Sitting before the tall oval mirror, she drew the bristles slowly through her hair, untangling the gentle waves that had loosened in sleep. Each careful stroke was steady and unhurried, a rhythm she had followed since childhood. The brush made a faint, soothing rasp, each pass gathering light from the window and casting glints along the strands. As she worked, her reflection softened, framed by the delicate trim of her nightgown and the golden hue of morning. This simple routine felt grounding, helping her release the remnants of dreaming and the subtle tension that lingered after her restless waking. After tending to her hair, she set the brush aside and reached for a small lamp on the bedside table. With practiced fingers, she wound the key at its base and touched a match to the waiting wick. The flame flared gently, its glow spilling into the quiet corners of the chamber and painting wavering shadows onto the walls. It was not for necessity. The sun was already brightening the city outside, but for comfort, a soft ritual that carried meaning she could not quite name. The light grew steady, and she exhaled in time with the flicker, the act of lighting the lamp making the morning feel both new and familiar. These quiet, attentive actions, brushing, tending to light, readying herself gently, became a way of shaping the day before anything urgent or uncertain could intrude, a thread of order maintained by hands that moved with care and heart. Her hands, worn smooth by years of gentle use, moved with quiet certainty across each simple task. Fingers long and nimble, she guided the ivory-handled brush through her hair, pausing just so whenever she reached a snag, then loosening it with patience instead of force. Each motion betrayed a history of careful attention, from the light pressure of her palm against the cool porcelain of the lamp to the precise way she wound its tiny brass key. These were not hands that withered away in idleness. They bore the soft imprint of work, a faint callus at the base of her thumb from knitting, a threadbare spot where her wedding ring used to rest, the dependable steadiness that came from years of morning rituals. Even in stillness, her hands trembled ever so slightly with memories. From their gentle grip came a sense of care that shaped the old house around her. The guests' hands brought comfort to everything they touched. When arranging blooms in the parlor vase, she pinched each stem with just the right pressure, never bruising a petal or letting a drop spill unsupervised onto polished wood. She smoothed the wrinkles from a tablecloth with swift, practiced sweeps, her knuckles whitening only briefly as she pressed the corners into place. Later, during her tea ritual, the delicate curl of her fingers around the cup transformed the plainest sip into a ceremony of warmth and presence. Even as she folded a friend's shawl and set it near the front hall in anticipation of the coming visit, her touch was sure and thoughtful. In every gesture, her hands revealed their quiet language, the balance of strength and tenderness needed to keep a household running, the wisdom etched in skin and muscle that understood how the littlest things could bring steady peace to a waking day. The home was neither grand nor sprawling, but instead stretched across a handful of cozy rooms arranged with care, a place shaped more by memory and feeling than by impressiveness. Every corner glowed with gentle use, the fireplace chipped at its edge from decades of kindling carefully stacked, the staircase polished to a gentle shine by generations of hands traveling up and down its rail, the carpets patched and re-sewn rather than replaced. While sunlight filtered richly through embroidered curtains in the parlor, the narrow hallways often held the cool, drowsy shadows of old city dwellings, inviting visitors to slow their steps and lean into the hush. Each space told a story, a dent in the pantry door from a childhood chase, a faded portrait above the mantel recalling a wedding morning, the faint pattern worn into the foyer rug by countless greetings and partings. The windows, deep set and occasionally drafty, opened onto the life of the street, yet kept the inside world quietly distinct, peaceful, sure of itself, held together by small familiar rituals. Yet, what truly defined this house was not its brick or mortar, but the feeling it gave all who entered. Here, there was a quiet steadfastness, a soul built from steady routines and whispered conversations. The air hummed with old laughter and gentle secrets, carried forward in the delicate chime of teaspoons, and the warm scent lingering after meals. In the evenings, the cozy dining room filled with the soft light of lamps and the gentle clatter of plates, every meal a gathering to confirm that comfort was found in company. The soul of the home resided in its resilience, in mended tablecloths and blooms repeatedly placed in chipped vases, in the way the household moved together through seasons and changes. It was a home that welcomed everyone with the quiet embrace of belonging, offering a sanctuary where burdens could be set down and simple pleasures became enough. In the smallest of gestures, a door held open, a blanket folded and waiting, one could find the very heart of this home, alive and quietly beating against the gentle rhythms of the city outside. Alongside the sturdy brickwork and wooden trim, the home's kitchen revealed walls with a gentle, hand-finished texture, plaster brushed smooth over old clay bricks, bearing faint imprints from years past. Over the doorway, bundles of herbs, sage, lavender, and rosemary, hung upside down in fragrant clusters, slowly drying in the soft air and filling the room with a subtle, earthy blend. Each time the guest passed through, the light brush of her shoulder sent another burst of sweet scent into the warmth drifting from the cast-iron stove. Copper pans lined the rear wall, polished and gleaming in the sun that filtered past the embroidered kitchen curtains. Wicker baskets stacked in the corner brimmed with hearty potatoes and bright red apples, while a rough-hewn table bore the gentle pocks and nicks of endless chopping, kneading, and stories spun over bread and tea. Outside, beyond the parlor's deep-set window, a narrow stone path wound its way along the side of the house, worn smooth by decades of comings and goings. Its flagstones, mottled with moss and edged by tufts of wild thyme, led to a snug garden plot tucked between house and wall. Morning sun caught droplets of dew on mint leaves and feverfew, while roses and violets spilled in cheerful confusion beneath the kitchen sill. Above the stoop, a tangle of grapevines climbed the aged wooden trellis, their leaves shifting gently in the quiet breeze, casting dappled patterns across the ground. The old gate at the far end creaked softly with every passing hand, leaving a memory within its weathered wood. These details, herbs, stone, clay, and earth, infused the home with a sense of timelessness, a quiet link between yesterday's labor and today's gentle gathering, grounding everyone who lived there in the rhythms of nature and care. As morning deepened and gentle light stretched into every corner of the little home, the world outside joined in the slow waking of the day. Through the kitchen window, the stone path beyond the house glowed softly, clear now of mist and wet with dew. The distant church bell rang the hour, sending its mellow notes rippling across the rooftops. From neighboring yards and lanes, the gentle calls of city swallows fluttered through the air and mingled with the clip-clop of a passing milkman's horse. Next door, a merchant's cart rattled over uneven cobbles, its wooden wheels creaking as crates shifted with each bump. Laughter carried faintly as a child in a starched pinafore darted past the garden gate, chasing after her skipping rope, the rhythm echoing off brick walls and crisp counterpoint to the measured drift of morning sounds. One by one, doors rattled open against their hinges. The scent of warm bread, the brisk cry of bundled newspapers, the pale glimmer of lamplight going out, each added a note to the street's gentle chorus. In the market square just a few blocks away, stalls were readied beneath striped awnings, shoulders brushing as merchants and neighbors greeted one another for the day's trade. The same old men in their well-brushed coats gathered beside the fountain, catching up on the city's news with slow, contented voices and the tap of walking sticks on ancient stone. On the river, a fisherman cast his line from the low bank, his quiet patience reflected in the glassy water stretching beneath the willows. Even the lamplighter, finishing his route from house to corner, moved with the sleepy satisfaction of a job well done, his long pole catching the morning sun with each swing. This soft orchestration of movement and life, insistent but never hurried, wrapped the home in a comforting embrace, a promise that, just beyond the clay walls and kitchen herbs, the city and its everyday rituals waited with open arms. Within this gentle clamor, the house and its inhabitant found their place, as much a part of the street's story as the stones beneath the path, and the light climbing patiently into the sky. Outside the home's window, the flow of city life took on a gentle, predictable rhythm. Neighbors strolled by in small groups, their conversations rising and falling with the hush of the morning. Mrs. Gill, from 3 doors down, shuffled past with her market basket, offering a brief nod and a soft, habitual smile to anyone who caught her eye. At the next corner, Mr. Baird tipped his hat as he paused to exchange a greeting with the milkman, both men wrapping their hands around steaming mugs against the lingering chill. Vendors with trays of fresh rolls ambled along the street, lifting the woven lids every so often to offer a warm, yeasty scent to those passing, and to entice the first customers of the day. Beneath the awnings, women in dark coats bargained over the price of sprigs and root vegetables, their laughter and occasional clucks of disapproval, and oddly cheerful music blending into the pulse of foot traffic. In the midst of these routines, wanderers moved more quietly. Unhurried tradesmen with satchels slung over tired shoulders, a couple of children trailing chalk patterns along the pavement, and an elderly man with a cane who paused near the stoop to catch his breath and listen to the church bell's lingering echoes. Behind a rattling handcart, a flower seller held out bunches of forget-me-nots and lily-of-the-valley, his voice barely above the sound of morning. From the window, the guest watched them all move past, feeling the gentle progression of time and the comfort it brought. Each passerby, neighborly or unknown, carried their own story, their routines and hopes mixing together just beyond the garden gate. Their presence lent the little home and its day a sense of belonging within something much larger, assuring the guest that neither burdens nor pleasures were ever truly carried alone, but moved along together in the current of daily life. As she lingered by the kitchen window, the guest paused to notice the world's quieter offerings. Upon the stone path, just beyond the herbs, a blackbird landed with a decisive flutter, its glossy feathers catching the sunlight. The bird pecked and hopped, head tilted, searching for breakfast among the dew-speckled grass between the flagstones. Its every movement was purposeful but light, and she found calm in its easy rhythm. Just as she watched, a shadow slipped across the edge of the garden, the cloud-soft silhouette of a tenant cat, slinking along the fence, blending in and out of sight. The two creatures, the bird, quick and bright, the cat, silent and slow, seemed caught in a dance as ancient as the city itself. Beyond her window, the breeze stirred the herbs hanging overhead, sending sprigs of rosemary and mint into gentle movement. The leaves outside joined in, tumbling along the stone path in little spirals of green and gold. Every so often, a rising gust would set the grapevine leaves quivering, their edges glinting with the last of the morning dew. The guest found herself listening to the gentle rustle, the faint percussion of stalk on stalk, the whisper of ivy pressing against the walls. In these small, shifting details, she felt the pulse of the world beyond the human day, a secret life animated by feathers, fur, and foliage, humming in perfect symmetry with her own slow, mindful routine. The scene was neither grand nor showy, but it brought her a quiet sense of connection and gratitude, a reminder that peace was found not only in the company of people, but also in the bird's song, a drifting shadow, and the tender rustling of leaves. As the sun climbed higher above the city rooftops, the colors within the little home and outside it began to shift and unfold. Where just moments ago the world had been glazed in the pearly half-light of dawn, now everything brightened with growing radiance. The parlor's faded wallpaper, painted with faint vines and roses, seemed to take on warmth and definition, blush pinks and gentle greens rising from beneath the gold-washed haze. Across the kitchen, the hanging herbs glowed like emeralds in fresh sun, while the simple wooden table picked up streaks of honey and amber. The worn clay walls softened, their pale surface dancing with sun-flecked shadows as light filtered through grapevine leaves climbing the outside trellis. Outside the kitchen window, dewdrops along the stone path ignited in tiny sparks of silver, fading gradually as the air grew warmer and the sun crept higher. Beyond the windows, the garden joined in this slow, magical transformation. Deep indigos and gray shadows gave way to playful greens and flashes of yellow, from blooming violets and feverfew. The blackbird's feathers, glossy with the sunlight, shimmered first with hints of midnight blue, then with highlights of bright iridescence as it hopped from stone to stone. Even the leaves of the grapevine changed character in the shifting light, first translucent and glowing at the edges, soon dark and velvet where their shadows overlapped. With every passing minute, the colors of home and city mingled in ways impossible, while the world still slumbered, turning ordinary places and familiar corners into something gently luminous. The guest felt her own heart adjust with the light, opening quietly as the radiance deepened, letting beauty enter her morning not in a sudden burst, but in gentle, steady waves. This change, so natural and unhurried, made the day feel full of newness, promising that the ordinary would keep revealing its wonders as long as she was willing to look and welcome them in. As she moved through the morning's gentle routine, placing cups on the breakfast tray, smoothing the embroidered tablecloth, and pausing now and then by the window, a faint memory returned, flickering beneath her calm motions. It was the image of her friend, laughing easily beside the fire in years past, their voices tumbling over one another in shared stories. There had been a night just like this, long ago, when the guest had lingered over a note unwritten, a misunderstanding left floating between kind words. The worry felt small now, like a cool shadow drifting across a sunlit floor, but its edges were sharp enough to make her hesitate for a breath. She wondered if today's visit would finally dissolve it, if a new light would enter the space that had grown quietly tense with time and timidness. Her hands, though steady, found themselves fussing with a plate's position, brushing invisible crumbs from a cloth until the details were perfect. Her worry was joined by other gentle echoes, sounds and sights of old mornings when letters brought unexpected news, or when a door closed a little too softly, signaling a change she hadn't asked for. Yet as the routine continued, each careful act from steeping tea to arranging a vase of lilacs, she found these memories, though persistent, softened with the work of her hands and the beauty around her. In the shifting colors of the room and the warm smells rising from the kitchen, the edge of her worry wore down, growing gentler with each new breath. She let herself accept its presence, neither fighting nor fleeing from it, simply recognizing the way it was woven into the fabric of her life, as ordinary as the patch on the rug or the morning light cathedraling on cream curtains. Within the small and loving motions of her day, there was space for both the comfort of routine and the flicker of old concerns, each making the other feel a little more human, a little more easily borne. As the silver tray caught the sunlight and the soft clink of cups settled the kitchen, her mind wandered to a story her friend once told on an evening much like this. She remembered how, after a supper by the fire, the two of them had traded tales, one about a garden maze overlooked by moonlight, where the bravest child in a village had dared to search for a lost ring, and instead found a frightened kitten curled in a bed of violets. The story had made them laugh until their sides ached, but later that night it returned to her as a dream, strange and bright, with her own footsteps echoing on the stone paths, and a single white cat watching quietly from beneath a flowering vine. That dream, fused with the laughter and the strangeness of old places, sometimes still visited her in the quiet moments before the house woke, as real as the smells of tea and lilac around her now. As she moved through her morning chores, she wondered about that forgotten ring and the maze from the story, if they existed anywhere beyond memory and dream. It wasn't the maze she missed, or even the kitten, but the feeling of exploring something alongside another, of finding small treasures in tangled places. A silent question pressed against her heart now. Would the afternoon bring a chance for both women to walk through old mazes together once more, discovering comfort and closeness as if no time at all had parted them? She glanced at the breakfast setting, noticing how the rising light silvered the edges of the plates and made the steam from her tea curl upward like the start of a new tale. With a soft sigh and a hopeful heart, she allowed the story, the dream, and the unspoken question to settle quietly between the day's actions, gentle threads of memory and hope waiting to be woven into whatever the coming hours might bring. On the edge of the parlor, with sunlight pooling in quiet shapes across the floor, she paused, her hands, still and gentle, rested on the linen-draped table as she listened to the hush that had blossomed within the house. It wasn't a silence that pressed or demanded, but rather one that welcomed, a space where she could let herself breathe, think, and simply be without the rush of words. She felt the softness in the air, almost as if the gentle light itself had substance and weight. In that brief interlude, the house and its smaller sounds seemed to hold steady just for her. The dull tick of the clock, the faint echo of distant footsteps, and the rustle of leaves at the open window. She did not need to name the longing, the worry, or even the hope for the day ahead. Instead, she allowed each feeling to wash over her, each emotion gentle and truthful, anchoring her to the present moment with the ease of a quiet breath. She stood like that for long seconds, eyes half closed, chin lifted faintly to the window light, while the city's morning continued its peaceful march beyond the walls. Old memories rose and faded in her chest, layered with dreams, old stories, and the anticipation that lingered for a guest knock. There was no urgency, no expectation for what should be said or done. The world could turn a little more slowly, and that was enough. The warmth across her hands, the crispness of her apron, and the scent of lilac on the air gathered together, becoming a symphony she could feel without a single note sung aloud. She knew, in that pause, the remarkable comfort of presence, where past, future, and the soft light of morning all joined her in silent understanding. When at last she stirred, it was with a steadier step and a heart more open, carried forward gently by the peace she had taken a moment to feel. The first notes of the meal were gentle and unhurried, as morning sunlight fell like honey across the table. A soft clink of china and silverware welcomed the guest and her hosts into the embrace of breakfast. The reddish-brown teapot, fat and warming, sent curls of fragrant steam into the air, while delicate cups, each a little different with their faded floral rims, waited to be filled. Warm bread emerged from a cloth-lined basket, its crust golden and dappled, carrying the faintest reminder of the nearby bakery. There was a dish of fresh butter, cool and pale, set alongside golden preserves and plums gathered from the garden. A faint aroma of lavender tea mingled with lemon zest and honey, weaving into the fabric of conversation without a single word being spoken. Between gentle pours and the breaking of bread, a sense of hush and care ran through it all. No bustle, no hurry, only the comfort of familiar company and the steady reassurance of morning's light. Each person found their rhythm, passing jam, slicing fruit, smiling between sips, letting the calm of the hour settle softly around them. There was laughter, quiet and sincere, and the easy murmur of stories remembered and retold. Unspoken hopes and old worries, for a while, faded beneath the calm shared between plates and cups. The guest relaxed, her hands steady now as she buttered a slice of sour bread, and listened to the peaceful clatter of forks and the tranquil hum of city life outside the window. The warmth over the table felt nearly like another blanket, gently enfolding each soul seated there. With every taste and gentle glance, the little gathering became its own haven, a place where, for one peaceful meal, everything difficult could be left outside. The simple act of sharing food, of moving in harmony with small and loving gestures, bound everyone together in the quiet certainty that, whatever the day might bring, this moment of welcome was enough. As the quiet meal unfolded within the warm walls of the parlor, the world beyond the windows grew steadily more lively. From the open sash, the sounds of the city's morning market drifted in, a chorus of merchant calls that intertwined with the gentle bark of a cart dog trotting at its master's heel. The vendors' voices rose and fell, scattering laughter and inventive pitches through the alleys and down the cobbled street. The wheel of a barrow rattled over loose stones as a farmer made his way with crates of apples stacked high, while the milliner's apprentice darted past with a basket of bright ribbons trailing like a parade. Chickens scratched in a hidden courtyard, clucking thoughtfully, and a flock of pigeons erupted skyward, their wings flashing silver as they circled above the nearby church spire. Even the wind became part of the city's song, threading scents of freshly baked oat bread and early lilies, with the sharper aromas of tanned leather and rain-washed stone. Here and there, Shutters clapped gently in a rising breeze, and laundry lines rose and dipped with each new gust, cotton shifts snapping in the morning sun. Hooves on stone mixed with the chatter of street children and the far-off melody of a hurdy-gurdy playing for a scatter of coins outside the bakery. Inside, the meal continued with calm, but every open door and window seemed to invite the world's hum to blend in, making breakfast feel at once sheltered and deeply connected to the life flowing beyond the threshold. The guest smiled quietly to herself, feeling the energy and hope in every small movement, reminded that their little home was one essential thread in the bustling tapestry of the city's day. The meal lingered in a gentle quiet that felt as natural as the morning sun, the clink of forks and the faint spill of tea just barely filling the air. For a while, no one felt pressured to break the peace. There was comfort in the simple sharing of food, in the breakfast's small rhythms of pouring, passing, and savoring. Then the guest's host, her voice low and kind, offered a fond recollection. "Do you remember the fog last spring? How it wrapped the street and gardens so thick that even the clock tower was just a bell in the cloud?" Her words drifted like a lullaby, full of warmth and simplicity, inviting a fresh thread of memory to wind through the hush. Soft smiles and small nods traveled the table, no elaboration needed. Even the city's noise seemed to hush for a beat, cradling those gentle words in its moving, golden light. Sometimes it was enough to say nothing at all, to trust that the slow exchange of glances and the steady familiarity of each other's presence could speak as clearly as any remark. As fingers curled around warm cups and the last bite of bread vanished from the plate, the guest felt the closeness settle deep in her heart. The table and room glowed not just from lamplight and sunshine, but from the comfort of understanding, the kind that made silence a kind of music, and a shared meal its gentle refrain. The church bell sounded again in the distance, a soft reminder that the day, with its promises and challenges, would soon call them outward. But for one beautiful moment, everything important was already present, unspoken and true, in the quiet warmth between friends and family, held together by nothing more and nothing less than the joy of simply being together. As breakfast drew to a gentle close, a familiar custom unfolded in the parlor, woven into the day like thread through fabric. The guest stood and carefully gathered each used napkin, folding them with practiced hands so every crease lined up perfectly. Her movements were slow, deliberate, first smoothing each square upon the table, fingers trailing gently along embroidered edges that bore the stories of earlier meals. The household joined in, hands busily but quietly collecting plates and straightening utensils, moving with the kind of rhythm that spoke of long habit and quiet cooperation. With each cloth folded and placed back in its drawer, the guest felt the weight of tradition, a ritual that signified not just the end of a meal, but also respect for the moment past, and a promise of more gatherings yet to come. At the mantel, her host performed another small custom. She traced a delicate, almost invisible symbol, 3 tiny circles, in the steam on the inside of the teapot's lid. This symbol, kept from her grandmother's village, was meant to bring good fortune and harmony to all who shared in the morning's tea. No one spoke as this was done, but everyone present observed, the movements so familiar they felt nearly as instinctive as breathing. The quiet joy in this act was found not in spectacle, but in meaning, a gentle reminder that home was built from both grand and tiny gestures, from traditions carried forth in silence and reverence. As the mark faded in the light, the room remained filled with a kind of gentle promise, a sense that the beauty of the day lay in these simple acts, repeated through the years and held close by loving hands. As the last of the morning plates were cleared, the host returned with a special dish carried on a graceful china platter, freshly baked seed cake, flecked with caraway, and dusted with powdered sugar. The aroma was sweet and earthy at once, its crumb golden and delicate as sunlight on wheat. She shared quietly, as she sliced generous pieces for each hand at the table, that the recipe had been her grandmother's own, passed down through handwritten notes tucked in between old prayer books and pressed flowers. The ritual of baking this cake belonged to every change of season, every gathering after hardship, and every joyful reunion. Each bite promised the comfort of time-tested sweetness, a taste familiar in the mouth and warm in the memory, reminding all present that their stories stretched back further than any burdens they carried that morning. The guest, tasting the seed-flecked crumb, felt a thread of connection to women who had gathered here before, mothers and daughters who had mixed these same ingredients in rooms lit by candle or early sun, who had leaned over worn counters and whispered secrets as the scent of baking filled the house. For a moment, the day seemed to pause, and lineage became something tangible, a bond before words, woven into cake and kindness, and the simple act of breaking bread together. As each plate was emptied and laughter sparkled in the quiet, the lineage of the household was honored. The sharing of food, seasoned by tradition and memory, offered more than nourishment. It was an embrace through time, comforting and familiar, and it left everyone at the table refreshed, sustained, and deeply at home. Throughout the parlor and kitchen, objects both ordinary and precious filled the space with stories written in wood, brass, and woven fiber. On the dining table, the broad surface was polished oak, its grain etched with years of friendly gatherings and soft meals, darkened in places where sunlight struck it each morning. Along the mantel, brass candlesticks gleamed, their bases warm and dimpled after endless polishings, catching the last drops of wax from every evening's light. By the window, a spinning wheel, its spokes smooth as riverstones from years of use, stood waiting like a silent witness to work and rest, pairs of nimble hands having shaped wool into thread with steady rhythm. Next to the hearth, a sturdy log basket, tightly woven from willow, held firewood stacked in careful rows, fibers showing every twist and nick earned from hauling kindling over seasons. Each piece, from the dimpled drawer pulls on a highboy to the gently carved legs of a chair, bore the gentle marks of touch and time. Quilts of woven fiber, arranged over the settee and at the foot of beds, offered color and history in every stitch. Some squares were dipped in the deep reds and indigos of old dye baths, others soft with age and faded to the hue of clover. Wicker baskets, round and oval, some tightly lidded and others open to the air, anchored corners filled with linens, sewing, or half-finished knitting. Even the door handles, burnished brass warmed by 1,000 hands, felt familiar to the palm, solid, cool in the morning, and softly glowing by afternoon. On a shelf above the kitchen's clay hearth, wooden spoons with carved handles nestled alongside a brass strainer, each item as much a keepsake as a tool. These objects, crafted of wood, brass, and woven fiber, served quietly in daily ritual, keeping company with every breath and footstep, and standing as gentle testimony to the careful building of home. As the morning wore on and gentle tasks filled the hours, small gestures carried hints of old beliefs and quiet superstitions. Before opening the window wide, the guest knocked lightly on the wooden sill, a habit she'd seen practiced since girlhood, meant to keep ill fortune from entering with the fresh air. She tucked a sprig of rosemary behind the kitchen door, recalling a grandmother's saying that herbs above the threshold brought protection and calm to the household. Even as she straightened the chair, she left one slightly askew at the table's end. Her mother once insisted this kept restless spirits from settling too comfortably near the family's bread and sleep. None of these rituals were discussed aloud. They were simply lived, pressed gently into the fabric of home by generations who'd trusted in the subtle magic of custom and care. Subtle as they were, such gestures provided a comforting sense of order and connection, a reminder that the unknown could be kept at bay with a touch, a word, or a kindly pause. Candles were always extinguished with a snuffed twist, never a breath, lest lingering hopes be blown away with the flame. Coins tucked under the salt box and shoes set neatly by the front step spoke to old fears that prosperity, once invited in, should never be carelessly spilled. These acts, small and nearly invisible, knit the day together with quiet confidence, layering modern life atop the foundation of wisdom whispered by ancestors. Moving through her daily routines, the guest felt both guided and gently held by the whisper of belief. Reassured that in a changing world, some mysteries could be met with nothing more than a careful ritual and the hope that ancient kindness would remain close at hand. The pace of the morning gradually softened, as the sun arced higher in the pale blue sky, shifting the light inside and beyond the home. The parlor, once filled with luminous gold, now wore dappled shade, its corners touched by a growing hush as the day moved forward. Through the high windows, the guest watched sunlight slip along the floorboards, the thin shadows cast by chair legs and table edges beginning to stretch long and lean. Each hour seemed to linger a little longer in the quiet, making the home's familiar outlines, mottled wallpaper, baskets of herbs, quilted throws draped on the settee, grow both more vivid and more dreamlike. Outside, the garden's stone path receded into shadow where the ivy crept, while the air turned cool for just a breath, a promise of afternoon's gentle drift. Within the gentle spell of passing hours, ordinary activities slowed, their edges softened by the reach of changing light. In the kitchen, shadows gathered under the table and climbed the legs of the spinning wheel, the metallic glint of brass fading as sunbeams shifted out of reach. Plates were stacked and put away without rush, the slow scrape of wood on wood blending with the soft creak of wicker baskets being settled for the day. From the open window, the sense of morning, fresh bread, wood smoke, the lemony sweetness of drying grass, faded slightly, replaced by the promise of afternoon tea. In the calm, the guest sensed more than saw how time's gentle tide carried everything onward. Each elongated shadow was a woven line between what had already filled the house and all that the quiet afternoon still held. So the hours flowed, marked not by clocks or sharp alarms, but by the patient stretch of light and shadow across the well-worn ground. As the sunlight eased into afternoon and the hush of the slower hours filled the little house, a light rapping sounded at the door. The guest paused her gentle sweeping, bristles trailing dust across the patched carpet, and listened to the new rhythm in the air. Outside, on the stone stoop, a delivery boy stood cradling a wrapped parcel and a sealed letter, both edges softened from travel through the city's bustle. He offered a polite dip of the cap, before vanishing back into the tangle of street sounds. The host accepted the package with a warm thank you, the small moment feeling somehow grand in the calm. Tissue and twine gave way to a tin of dried lavender and a neat bundle of fresh correspondence. A reply from a cousin far away, a note of thanks from a neighbor, the promise of a fruit tart on its way for supper. With the delivery tucked safely inside, and the street's footsteps fading behind the closed door, the last of the morning's tasks drew to a gentle close. The guest set her broom near the kitchen hearth, feeling a quiet pride in the restored tidiness and order captured in each corner of the house. She slipped the lavender into a china dish, placing it by the window so its clean scent could rise and mingle with the warmth of sun and afternoon. Unwrapping a single letter, the host read aloud its opening lines, gentle words carrying love and news over miles and years, which filled the room with a hush sweetened by simple connection. In a world that often asks so much, the completion of these small acts, a parcel received, a floor swept, a note read aloud, carried a satisfaction as complete as any celebration. With the day moving softly toward its center, the house felt both peaceful and full, its soul deepened by every letter opened and every touch of care. As the afternoon shadows lengthened across the garden path and the warmth of the day settled gently inside, signs of return began to ripple through the house and street. The laughter of children echoed before any door swung open, a bright tumbling music of feet racing up stone steps and voices calling out names. Door latches clicked, and the familiar rhythm of little shoes filled the hallway, trailed by the gentle scold and welcome of a mother's voice. Further down the lane, the creak of wagon wheels announced the approach of workers drawn home by the irresistible pull of evening, fathers and older sons with sleeves rolled, carrying the scent of sawdust or ink, pausing beneath the eaves to roll tired shoulders and greet neighbors with nods heavy with the day's labor. The air grew thick with a new energy, both weary and joyful, as the house filled with the quiet pride and soft chaos of family returning to their nest. Elders arrived a little slower, shuffling steps accompanied by the steady tap of canes and the rustle of skirts as grandmothers and aunts found their places near the fireside. Old stories bloomed in low voices, punctuated by the laughter of small ones darting between chairs and skirts, all drawn closer by the promise of supper. The house grew lively. A kettle sang on the stove, doors opened and pressed closed, new deliveries were stowed away, and a cat slunk beneath a kitchen table searching for warmth. In the embrace of returning footsteps, the day's work dissolved into the comfort of reunion. As the golden glow deepened, the walls seemed to hold their breath, wrapping the bustle in a sense of belonging. With every voice raised and every weary hand washed and set to rest, the humble home became more itself, brimful of stories, comfort, and the kind of togetherness that turned the quiet rituals of the day into a tapestry rich with life. As the bustle of returning footsteps quieted to the soft undertones of evening, the stifling warmth within the home slowly dissolved. Windows, opened wide to catch any stray breeze, welcomed in cooler air, tinged with the scent of earth and fading sun. The parlor's lace curtains stirred with the first true sigh of night, fluttering as if in relief. In the garden, dew crept tenderly over petals and flagstones, and even the most restless child paused to watch the day grow gentle. Lamps were lit, their glow soft and golden, spilling comfort into corners where heat had lingered hours before. The familiar things, quilted throws, polished wood, the patchwork rug in the hall, felt suddenly richer, gathered into the shelter of dusk. There was a hush, a sense that the walls and everything within them had let go a little, settling into the arms of approaching night. Outside, the city sky changed its face in slow, breathtaking sweeps. Pale blue deepened into lavender, and then into dusky rose, as rooftops cast long, final shadows that melted away behind chimney stacks and climbing ivy. The first stars winked into view, just as a blush of orange drifted along the horizon, lighting the upper windows with their last borrowed warmth. Elderly neighbors watered their gardens in the fading light, while cats prowled fences, and the flutter of wings overhead marked birds returning to roost. Even the sound of the street softened, market calls faded, carriage wheels stilled, and only the faint chime of a bell or laughter from a distant window remained. For the family, gathered now around one another, the changing sky was a quiet backdrop to their evening, reminding them that just as heat and sun receded, the world could always remake itself in soothing colors, promising rest and renewal with each turn of nightfall. With the evening air cooling and the shadows deepening across the rooms, preparations for the night's fires began. The guests nudged open the kitchen door and gathered kindling from the willow basket, each piece chosen with care from the tangle of twigs and small logs collected earlier in the season. She knelt beside the hearth, where the ashes of the last fire offered a muted memory of warmth, and with nimble, practiced hands, arranged the wood into a gentle pyramid. The first spark caught quickly in the dry chips, and soon the flames licked up eagerly, casting an amber flicker across the stove's cast-iron surface. In their glow, the copper pans took on new life, shining softly as the guests set a kettle of water to heat for tea and laid out fresh potatoes to roast for supper. It was an age-old ritual, the lighting of a fire, a simple task that transformed the house, filling it with the promise of comfort and nourishment. In the parlor, wood was loaded in the ornate stove, its door opening with a well-oiled creak that spoke of everyday use. The fire built there would serve not just for warmth, but as a heart for evening gatherings. As flames grew, the circle of chairs edged close, making room for knitting baskets, a favorite book, or a plate of sweet cakes brought to share. All around, the light glided along the polished surface of the table and danced in the brass candle sconces, drawing the household together in its embrace. Soon, fragrant hints of baking bread, roasting roots, and steeping herbs mingled with the smoke's tender sweetness. The crackle and pop of burning wood formed a gentle soundtrack for stories exchanged and hands held close, the heat-easing muscles tired from the day and drawing contented sighs. In the simple act of tending the fire, everyone present found themselves not just warmed, but woven together, sharing the soft magic that lingered wherever flame and fellowship met. As the fire settled into its steady, comforting rhythm, another ritual began, one as old as any in the house. The guest took up the large, well-worn jug from beside the kitchen door and carried it carefully to the yard's pump. Outside, dusk lingered in shadows, and the brisk air made the iron handle cool to the touch. Each pull of the lever sent water gushing out with a cheerful splash, filling the jug until it brimmed with cold, clean promise. With steady arms, she returned inside, her feet sure along the flagstones, and poured the shimmering water into a wooden pail set just within the entryway. The slap of water against the grain was strangely satisfying, a prelude to the gentle cleansing that came next. These were not chores performed hastily or with complaint. They were tender acts of care, the daily tending that allowed the house to keep shining under the steady wear of many lives. With the pail ready, she drew a sturdy broom from its hook and dipped the bristles lightly in the cool water. Starting at the far end of the kitchen, she swept the dampened fibers across the wide planked floor, guiding dust and stray crumbs into careful piles. Fragrant traces of hearth smoke and lavender rose with every stroke, mingling with the fresh, mineral scent that marked the evening's renewal. The boards, washed and gleaming, reflected shivering stripes of firelight as the room transformed beneath her patient effort. Once the path was clear and the last drop of water had soaked away, there remained a feeling of freshness and order, a gift for those who would cross the floor later with bare, tired feet. As always, the work was quiet, almost meditative, a bridge from the bustling day to the slower grace of night. Through such simple gestures, water fetched, floor swept, the home was readied for rest, and its heart prepared for the gentle comfort of darkness and dreams. As dusk deepened into true evening, there was a practiced ritual in closing up the house for the night. One by one, windows that had welcomed breezes and sunlight all day were gently pushed shut, latches firmed and curtains drawn with soft, final sweeps. She paused at each window, peering briefly into the darkening street or the shadowed garden before letting the fabric curtain fall, weaving a barrier between the safe, lamplight world inside and the quiet uncertainty of dusk beyond. The last wafts of evening air, spiced with wood smoke and jasmine, lingered just a moment before being sealed away. Every click of the latch, every gentle adjustment of drape, marked a boundary, restoring a sense of enclosure and calm, ensuring that the warmth so carefully kindled would stay close for the night ahead. With the home's shell secured, she turned her attention to the living creatures in her care. Out in the tidy backyard, the chickens were gathered into their coop, feathers rustling in contented protest as they settled onto their roosts. She checked the latch and scattered a handful of dry grain, whispering a few kind words into the dusk as the hens blinked sleepily in the straw. Near the porch, the house cat lifted its head, eyes glinting in the last light. She coaxed it back indoors, scratching behind its ears before it curled on its favorite rug by the stove. A final check around the garden fence assured her that all was safe and undisturbed. No hole left open, no bowl left dry. Returning inside, she was welcomed by the gentle flicker of lamps and the steady pulse of home at rest, content in the knowledge that everything and everyone was now gathered and sheltered beneath the same roof, ready to yield to the peace of night's embrace. With the lamps burning low and the warmth of the fire settling into every room, the day gave way to a softer quiet, broken only by the gentle tones of evening conversation. In the parlor, chairs scooted closer together, and the smallest ones draped themselves across laps or nestled onto braided rugs. The ordinary guest, cheeks still warm from the work of tucking in chickens and closing up house, found her seat beside the hearth, her teacup cupped carefully between steady hands. The host, knitting needles in hand, asked one question, and from that began a web of soft voices, memories of a summer picnic under oaks, a neighbor's recipe for plum preserves, or an old riddle whose answer required 3 or 4 guesses and a lot of laughter. The sounds lingered, suspended with the woven scent of wood smoke and lavender, echoing in corners, climbing the walls and filling the house with a feeling of complete haven. Hours thinned, marked by the occasional stoke of the fire or refill of a lamp, yet the murmurs remained, gentle and unhurried, impossible to script, but so easy to cherish. Now and then, conversation paused, letting the silence move in like a familiar friend, carrying with it nothing but peace. These small exchanges and slow pauses belonged to evening alone, when there was nothing left to be done and everything to be remembered. A final story was shared, a childhood adventure in the woods beyond the city, a chorus of voices joining in its retelling. The hush that followed was not heavy, but content, a restful ending to a day well lived. At last, good nights were whispered, chairs carefully returned to their places, and slippers shuffled away across the parlor's faded rug. Behind the walls, the last lingering words curled upward, drifting quietly beneath the beams and rafters as the home slipped gently towards sleep. With night firmly settled over the city, the home's windows glowed softly, every lamp and candle shining with a gentle, steady light. Each room was touched by its own amber star, a glass lamp on the parlor table, flickering with the dance of its small flame, a shaded sconce in the hallway casting slow, oval patterns onto the wallpaper, and a pair of squat candles atop the mantel, melting quietly down to their wicks. In the bedrooms, single lamps illuminated mirrors and cast honey-colored pools on folded quilts, while in the kitchen, a lantern swayed beside the back door, guiding late footsteps to their rest. The guest, preparing for bed, welcomed the warmth that spilled from beneath every shade and across familiar floorboards. She traced their soft pools of light with her eyes, collecting the comfort they offered as carefully as one might gather a handful of bright pebbles along a moonlit shore. The lamplight did more than banish the dark. It transformed the ordinary things of the house into quiet wonders, each object made gentle and golden with the passing of day into night. The brass handles, teapot, and polished chairs all glimmered as if sharing secrets whispered by the flames. Faces softened, lines faded, and even the shadows sharpened into kind, familiar company. Just as the stars blinked alive over the rooftops beyond the drawn curtains, these man-made stars kept watch, promising safety and togetherness. When the last good nights were murmured, and the doors quietly pulled to, their glow remained, the soul of the home gathered into tiny beams floating above the hush. It was a light that would linger through dreams until dawn, a reassurance that all within the walls would be held steady, safe, and at peace, until a new day's pale glow touched the city once again. With the lamps dimmed and doors closed for the night, a hush settled in every corner of the house. In the hallway, as she made her slow way to bed, the guest let a light, tuneless hum slip into the quiet, a melody she didn't remember learning, as natural to her as breathing. It was gentle and low, a ribbon of sound winding above the soft creak of floorboards and the distant crackle of the parlor fire. In the kitchen, the host paused her tidying and let out a long, contented sigh, the kind that seemed to turn the last hours of work into a kind of gratitude. The cat, curled and half asleep on its favorite rug, flicked an ear at the sound and then settled deeper, its presence marking the peaceful, homey hush that now wrapped around them all like a quilt. Outside, the city stilled under a canopy of stars, the clamor of the market and the bustle of footsteps disappearing into memory. The rooms breathed out the warmth and rhythm of the day, carrying trapped scents of baking, lavender, and wood smoke back into the cool air. The sighs and hums of those inside softened what the clock could not hold, the laughter, gentle labor, and quiet company that gave shape to each passing hour. In this twilight, the home itself seemed to exhale, a slow, deep breath that left the walls at ease, the beds welcoming, and hearts quietly full. Soon the only sounds were the gentle ticking of the mantel clock and the faint echoes of the guest hum drifting through the hush, marking the promise of rest and the certainty that, when the house awoke, the world would begin again with the same ancient, comforting song.